Ready? Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for joining us for our second ADV Law and Policy Subcommittee meeting. I'll do a quick overview on some of the previous meetings we've had, just for the benefit of those who are maybe watching this recording later as Katie's doing that. Our first overall ADV group meeting was January 5th to kind of kick things off, to frame the issue, get some context, and realize what the scope of the problem was. We then had a follow-up overall work group meeting, a large group of folks with guest speakers from Oregon and Rhode Island, share some lessons learned. And we talked a little bit about how the ADV effort here ties into our Virginia Marine Debris Reduction Plan update. As for this committee, on February 10th, we had our first meeting. We had the North Carolina Boating Administrator speak to several lessons learned, and also Gary Jacobs with LNG Towing to kind of give a contractor's perspective. So off to a good start with those shared perspectives and lessons learned. And then our first funding subcommittee meeting was February 19th, and we really delved into a lot of the funding sources, a lot of issues, potentially with fees, the cost of disposal. Those are ongoing projects to really get a better idea of what those elements are. And then we had our great first removal subcommittee meeting on February 22nd, and just talked about some intros, some kind of a wish list, and how they'll be working with the first two committees I mentioned, because a lot of those, I think with our committee and then the funding committee, have the biggest lift to understand the policy constraints, solutions. And then finally, we had our first outreach subcommittee meeting on March 4th. And again, more introductory work and developing some of the goals with that committee. And Jessica Steelman with Accomatic Northampton Planning District Commission is here with us today. So she's leading that. And that's really it for our past meetings. So we're really looking to kind of get back into some of the policy stuff that we've had. We'll get some updates from Anthony with Virginia Coastal Policy Center at William & Mary Law School. I'll provide some research updates on some of the background stuff we're doing. We will kind of review a list of some of these questions we'd like to pose to other states, probably about a half dozen over the next couple of weeks, and email and phone call interviews, but to really make sure we're capturing everything that this group has come up with. And then we're going to kind of get into a general discussion led by Katie, and then we'll kind of wrap it up with getting a next meeting set. So that's it, and I'll turn it over. Anthony, if you're here, to give us a little update on the white paper.
Yes, good morning, everybody. Just let me know if you can't hear me or anything.
You're good.
Great. So yeah, we are working away on the white paper. And so we, sorry, what we're working on right now is getting the examples from other states that we would like to use to make recommendations for Virginia, and also taking a look at what Virginia is doing now. And so I guess, kind of going through what we have. For Virginia, we've found that the ADV approach is very piecemeal. It's spread over, it's split between two agencies. It's spread over different chapters in the Virginia Code. And so one recommendation we already have would be to streamline that, authority, more coordination between DWR and VMRC. And to make that approach a little more comprehensive. I can go in a little bit later what I mean by comprehensive. Be recommending the Florida's approach in their statutes is solid. It goes into more detail on like what their approach to defining a derelict vessel is, what they can do once it is determined to be derelict by their marine law enforcement agency, FWC. And then it also goes into how the contractors should, like what they need to do to be contractors. They need to have their permits, they need to have full insurance, those types of things that would make it more clear for Virginia what exactly the process for addressing an ADV is. Another thing that I found kind of that seems to be a broader approach is trying to delegate some of the authority or some of the responsibility for removing ADVs to the localities, but with state agency support. Usually this is through some sort of grant program where localities can be reimbursed by the state. So either, depending on how it's written in, it would be DWR or VMRC. And that seems to be a pretty efficient approach that some states are taking. You know, the localities would be able to find these boats probably more easily. They would know them, and they would be able to contract out, and it would alleviate some of the burden on the state agencies if they are, you know, instead of themselves having to go out and roam the entire state looking for ADVs, they can, you know, more administer a program that's local based. That would be something that I think we're going to recommend in the paper. And so in general, the other things we're looking at is part of this kind of more streamlined approach is it's very unclear DWR's authority to remove ADVs. I know they are technically responsible for registering boats, but the statutory language is for VMRC. So, you know, it's those types of discrepancies that we need, you know, one single unified approach to ADVs. I understand that these are separate agencies and they would splitting some responsibilities, but getting a more clear structure to how they split responsibilities and what exactly the process is something that I think would be a good first step. And so right now we're looking at five states for examples. There is probably room for more examples. So if anybody has a good policy idea from a different state that's not one of the ones I covered, please let me know. But right now we are looking at Florida, North Carolina, Maryland, Oregon, and California. Florida has a comprehensive approach, and they have some other cool non-statutory programs. Actually, I'm going to retract that. They are in the statutes, but they are not, you know, your standard ADV approach. So as I think we've mentioned in these meetings before, Florida has an at-risk program that allows FWC to look around. If they identify a vessel that they determine to be at risk of becoming derelict, they can cite it, and they can look for the owner, and they can also issue fines with it if the owner does not cooperate and does not make it, does not alleviate the issue of it being derelict. Another interesting aspect of that is they can, if somebody's living on that boat, they can essentially make them leave the boat until it is removed from the state waters or determined to no longer be derelict. And so that would be something that I would also recommend for Virginia to do. It's very proactive. You know, if you can find these boats, and then, you know, if you can't find the owner, you know, then you can start your process of addressing removal, hopefully before this is a bigger issue if it sinks. You know, so another thing, you know, the more proactive, the better for most situations. And that seems to be Florida's putting a lot of effort into being more proactive about it and trying to not have to deal with it on the back end. And so another thing that I flagged from Florida is when a private party tries to acquire a title for an abandoned vessel, they have to notify FWC that they are trying to do that, and FWC will look into who this owner is. So I think that would help with the potential problem of people trying to kind of steal title to a vessel that may or may not be truly abandoned, because they have to notify law enforcement that they're doing this. And then, you know, law enforcement could probably get a better read on what exactly they're doing, whether this is truly abandoned. And, you know, they might be able to find the owner if, you know, this other person's good faith effort failed. So that is an interesting approach. They do not let private citizens just take boats. And so, you know, you can't get a title in Florida. You can't get a title to an abandoned vessel until FWC approves it. So if you go to the DMV to register a boat, and it's determined to be abandoned or derelict, they will not give you a title until FWC writes off on it. And so the last thing I wanted to mention in Florida, now I think that's it. For Florida also has a turn-in program. It's not the one I'm briefly highlighting it because it seems to be not as robust as California's. So I chose to talk more about California's. but a vessel turn-in program is also something we would recommend. And so I'll just switch over to California's highlights. California has some good and some bad highlights. The good, they have a vessel turn-in program and they have a grant program that have now combined into one application for localities to do. So they can have one application and they can get money for both a vessel turn-in program and a removal program. And these are comprehensive. They cover disposal as well as removal and storage. That's the money covers all three of those things. But on the bad side, their program is only for recreational vessels, which does not seem to be, it's unclear why, because they fund most of they fund it through fuel surcharges, but they actively reimburse commercial vessels that pay these fuel surcharges. So they're choosing not to do commercial for unknown reasons. So I would not recommend that Virginia differentiate the two. If you go forward. Another thing, sorry if I'm taking too much time, let me know. Just trying to run through everything we have so far.
You're good.
Great. So I flagged North Carolina on here because we believe we had Major Meyer on this last subcommittee meeting. He's telling us a little bit about their approach. North Carolina seems to be ramping up their approach pretty heavily, especially in the wake of Hurricane Florence. They had many ADVs, and the governor and the legislature got involved and started providing more money for North Carolina to kind of address this issue. And they also recently they filed a report to the legislature about the best practices that they would recommend to the legislature, and it's a lot of what we're covering. So I kind of flagged that, like, these are the programs they identified as thing, and it was similar ideas of proactive approach, clearer, more streamlined authority for the state agencies, and locality efforts funded through states. So I kind of highlighted that those are some things that North Carolina has identified them as best practices, and I'll be identifying several of those as well as something that I think Virginia could do in their approach. And so then I went to Maryland a little bit because of the funding. I believe we've talked about this in the funding subcommittee already, but Maryland has a 5% excise tax on all vessel sales in their state, which funds their ADV efforts. And so, that is a tax, so that would have to go through the Virginia legislature, which, that's easier said than done. But it does provide a solid source of funding for Maryland. And then another thing, kind of on the flip side of what we're talking about with Florida and the marina issue, is the Maryland code allows a marina owner, if a vessel is left in a marina without authorization for only more than 48 hours, a vessel owner can remove it from the slip or the dock, and they can transport it somewhere else. Has to be within 30 miles of the dock, and they have to put clear notice of like where it is, how you can get it, and that type of stuff. But it does allow the marina owners to be proactive themselves. And if they, if a boat is, if they think a boat is becoming derelict or abandoned and in risk of, endangering their dock or their marina, or, maybe costing them a slip if it sinks, they can be proactive themselves and move it. They would still, if they wanted to eventually claim title to it, they'd have to go through the full formal process of acquiring title. So it would not really circumvent that, but it would allow them to be proactive and hopefully alleviate some of their concerns of, vessels being abandoned at their marinas. Because if you can get it out of the water, it's going to be easier to deal with than if it sinks at your slip. And so so I won't touch on this too much because in the last big work group meeting we had, Dorothy Deal from Oregon kind of talked about a lot of this stuff, but Oregon has an interesting approach as well. One thing is they split the definition of abandoned and derelict, which, so those are two separate things in Oregon. It doesn't affect that much how they attack, removing ADVs in general, but it is an interesting distinction. And also they're interesting is how they fund their program. They take $150,000 every 2 years from boating registrations, and they use that to fund ADVs. Also flagging that seems like a relatively small amount. For reference, I believe Florida's grant program spent $1 million last fiscal year, or the 2018-19 fiscal year, just in grant money to localities, and they have more funding. So yeah, it's an interesting approach. Oregon's a smaller state, but they also seem to be capping their potential funding pretty low. It's a pretty hard ceiling of $150,000 every 2 years, but that's what they're working. That's what they're working with. And, I'm sure everybody would love more money. I think that goes without saying, but finding ways to get the money depends on the state. Every state's kind of doing their own thing. And so those are the 5 states we're looking at right now as examples. We'll be looking into seeing if there are any other interesting aspects from other states that we can incorporate. If anybody has any suggestions, please let me know. I will put my email in the chat here in a minute. Did anyone have any questions? I feel like I've just been talking at the group for a little bit.
Anthony, I have one.
Sure.
Okay, Neil.
What are you finding out other states are doing specifically with the liability issue if any kind of organization attaches a line to a ADV, and how are they liable? How do they get around that? How do they deal with that?
So in most states that address liability, the agencies responsible generally have a liability shield. Like for instance, Florida FWC is not responsible for any damage to the vessel that they're trying to remove. Unclear exactly how their liability would be if they were to say damage somebody else's property. I think that would get into some more complicated legal issues that I'm still looking into there. And for a contractor, at least Florida and I believe California, both of them require in their statutes that any contractor that they're contracting to remove these vessels have a full insurance. They have specifics on what exactly that needs to cover. I could list those out for you if you would like. It's a couple sentence list, and they also require that they have their permits with the state. So they once they're contracted out, those insurers are going to be, or those contractors are going to have their insurance to back them up, which is required for them to get that contract, and then the state will rely on their statutory immunity shields if they're the ones doing it.
Thank you.
No problem. Any other questions? So if I didn't mention, that would be something, those types of insurance requirements and liability shields are absolutely something Virginia should consider putting in their approach.
Anthony, we heard from North Carolina's Department of Wildlife Management that the state has responsibility, and that they basically become the owners of the boat during the removal process, and then they take the boat off of their records once it's been disposed of. Is that an option that you're looking at, as opposed to having all the liability insurance requirements on the removers, the towers?
Yes, I am looking into that more. I remember Major Meyer telling us that North Carolina keeps title the entire process, so they never really relinquish ownership. So it's less of a liability issue for the contractor who's actually doing the removal. I believe they always contract out. And yeah, that is something we're looking into. I think, just to be safe, it might be wise to still require insurance from these contractors. But that would alleviate, especially on the back end. We've been hearing, the removal is one thing. The storage and disposal is another thing that could potentially have liability down the road. And so Florida's approach doesn't really seem to cover. It seems to cover the removal pretty clearly, like the removal process, but not so much the who has this boat, who's disposing of it, who's responsible for it in storage. And so that would be an instance where the state of North Carolina holding ownership would make that much more clear, because this is the state's boat, and then you can follow their then. So I'm just a roundabout way to say it's much more clear that way.
Katie, if I could just, good morning, this is Elizabeth. If I could just mention that, I think that you'd have to make clear, what are you talking about? So removal of abandoned boats from publicly owned bottomland would be within VMRC's jurisdiction. If it's on land, then that's when some of these other abandoning and gaining title measures can be taken too, but that's not the navigational hazard and the water quality issue that they are out in the water. And they're also more mobile if they're on a trailer than they are out in the water. So might want to think about, since we have such a bifurcated system in Virginia, mentioning that too.
I think Major Meyer also mentioned, I believe I mentioned it, I'm going to mention it in the paper, is when the abandoned boats are on land, they are technically litter in North Carolina, subject to their litter laws, which are pretty straightforward. So that's something, that would help that distinction. If it's on public owned bottomland, it's this problem. If it's on land, it's litter. Great. So I think I generally mentioned, I think everything I want to say. Mainly besides the more streamlined approaches for the in the code, like other programs, I think Virginia could consider would be a vessel turn-in program like California's, an at-risk program like Florida's, and some sort of locality-based effort supported by the states. Obviously, localities are going to have a hard time dealing with these things themselves. But another interesting note on California that I forgot to mention is when they do in their grant programs, they only reimburse. So the locality will have to front the money, which is both a good and a bad thing. Probably cuts down spending because you're only reimbursing what was actually spent and not what was estimated. But also then the locality has to front what could be a significant portion of money, which might be stressful for them. Any other questions or comments? I'm going to put my email in the chat right now while I'm thinking about it.
Great, thank you, Anthony. We very eager to see the recommendations in that report. Any other questions at this point for Anthony? If not, will you be staying with us for the whole call today?
Yes.
Okay. And I know Elizabeth needs to
one
go.
more.
Pardon?
I had one more for Anthony. How do they transfer the title these other states when they're going to take over an ADV vessel?
Are you saying for a private party or for the state?
For anybody really? How do they, like, who, because you say who takes ownership of it? Does the state take ownership of it? Does a private party, a contractor?
So that depends on the state. So North Carolina, they'll be like the state will have ownership the entire time. And usually it seems if there's a separate program for a private party that wants to claim ownership for an ADV, and that's usually a pretty rigorous process of declaring it abandoned, going through publishing in a newspaper, and each state has some variation on that. But most states, I believe, if the state is the one removing it, they will generally keep title unless they decide to give it to the contractors. That's North Carolina is the only one that says that clearly, unfortunately. The other states are pretty vague on what exactly they're doing with the vessels once they're removed.
Yeah, North Carolina seemed to have a good approach to it.
Yeah, I think that will most likely be a recommendation, that making it very clear that the state has title the entire time is the simplest and probably the most efficient approach. Because all the other states, unfortunately, are pretty vague on what they're doing, on what the state is doing with the vessel once it's removed.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Anthony or Elizabeth, who has to go to another meeting? Okay, well then let's move on to our next speaker is Ed Tillett with the Waterway Guides. Ed has been in conversations with some insurance companies and will share his insights and perhaps generate a whole lot more questions for us all. So Ed, if you could go off of mute and turn on your camera if you wish.
Better not turn on the camera. I just got back to the office from doing some some meetings out, so we'll get a chance to meet me maybe face to face next time.
Okay.
But thank you for the offer, and if everyone can hear me fine. I came to the meeting late. I apologize. I was out. We had a big meeting yesterday out of town, and I just got back in and was getting some things done around here, so I'm not quite ready for prime time. But I missed the first part of the meeting because I was involved in some other efforts here at the office, but I would like to thank Katie for asking me to join in. I don't know that I have a whole lot to offer this August group on the work that it's doing at this point, except some of the experiences and discussions that I had as part of a larger group last year about this time in the state of Georgia. And in one of our first meetings that Katie invited me to, I took the risk of offering an opinion that there had been some discussions in Georgia with the Department of Natural Resources, with the Attorney General's office, with National Marine Manufacturers Association, Boat US, Save Georgia's Anchorages, America's Great Loop Cruising Association, Waterway Guide Media, of which I am the editor-in-chief, general manager of that company. We've been around since 1947 and publish 21 books and cruising guides to the United States annually, and apps and mobile apps and all that other cool stuff for boaters. But during the discussions with the state of Georgia and the solutions that they were looking to for abandoned and derelict vessels, various opinions were expressed about putting the responsibility of managing the costs of vessels on the vessel owner, specific to them carrying a particular insurance policy or a rider of some sort. And a lot of antennas went up and a lot of ahas went off when someone said, well, yes, that would solve some of these problems if we as those who are interested in abandoned and derelict vessel alleviation, if not total elimination, which will never occur, could put that ownership on boat owners via an insurance policy. I talked with Scott Croft, who is, I think he's editor, he's policy guy, and I think David Kennedy at Boat US about this, because Boat US is owned by Geico. And of all the companies out there that are large insurance companies, there's one. And there is some discussion going on behind the scenes about this and whether or not insurance companies could in fact offer some level of insurance for vessels if they become into the status, or if they come into the status of abandoned or derelict. And the only connection that I can make at this point, I think this is a huge undertaking. This isn't something that will happen overnight. But could it be a solution? I don't know. In a discussion with Scott in a short article that I wrote a few months ago for one of our newsletters, it turns out that, and any of those of you who own vessels, I own a boat, and of course, most of our staff own boat because we're a waterway guide. And most of the folks who worked on this initiative with Save Georgia Anchorages do as well. It turns out that my insurance policy on my vessel does not cover, let's see if I can get this straight. I have a standard policy. The value of the vessel is insured at, I think, $240,000. And if my vessel is destroyed by a hurricane or a storm, my policy does not cover the salvage of that vessel. It only covers, and some of you may know this, I learned this a few months ago, they'll write me a check for the money that I lost if the vessel is totally destroyed. They'll give me $240,000 if they prove that it's a total loss. But if it's sitting on somebody's property, my policy, I'd have to use those proceeds to help get that vessel off that property or any damage that it may have caused elsewhere. So Scott at Geico and Boat US said, you could have a salvage policy rider on top of what you have. And that aha moment went off for us as well. And we said, well, the group of us who were working with Georgia on their ADV issue, or at least exploring it, it's a much larger issue that I won't get into now. It had to do with anchoring rights and so forth in Georgia. But the question came up, well, why couldn't everyone have a policy that says if your boat reaches ADV status, however that is defined, that there would be a policy that would help cover that, and that the insurance industry would cover that. So that's about all I've got to offer at this point in terms of background and insight. But as this becomes a national problem, is it possible that Virginia or our work group or whatnot could begin exploring some of that with insurance companies and insurance providers and underwriters, et cetera, and ask about that? And would that help solve some of these problems? That's the question. And that's pretty much what I've got to offer, Katie.
Great, thank you, Ed. Any open discussion about this possibility?
Well, that's actually a good point, because a lot of us who lived on the Chesapeake Bay during Hurricane Isabel were surprised to find out that there were limitations on our insurance policies on our boats. And I remember calling my insurance company, which was through Boat US at the time, and asking, I hurricane rigged the boat. What else do I need to do? Am I covered if my boat is destroyed? And, that's when you find out that, yeah, your boat is covered if your boat's destroyed, but it's still on you to figure out how to get it out of the water.
I would think that I'm back in here. So yeah, you had firsthand experience with that, and I just learned about that a few months ago and wrote a piece on it. So I'm wondering, I can't imagine, this is a double negative, I can't imagine that the insurance companies would not be interested in generating another policy or another line of revenue and resource here. I'm sure it would take a long time to do the actuaries and figure out the tables and whatnot. However, for those of us who are genuinely interested in this abandoned and derelict vessel situation that continues to grow across the country, is there a way to require vessels and vessel owners to have some sort of a policy that would cover the removal of that particular vessel from public waters or public land, if in fact that's where it ended up, and just make that a requirement, a rider, as part of some uniform act across the country? I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's a key thing that you just said, across the country. I wonder what the unintended consequences would be if one state had that requirement, but the adjoining states did not. My guess is you'd see fewer boats registered in Virginia if Virginia had that, and if Maryland did not. But yeah, okay. Any other thoughts, comments, questions?
Yeah, so I'll just jump here. I didn't really get into it. It's more of a, I think, a little bit more of a funding thing, as I have it in the paper. We are going to mention that the possible aspect of mandating insurance. Our general concerns that we found so far with that is that a lot of the times the people who are getting insurance are not the ones who are abandoning their boats. So, the ones that we're having trouble finding the owners, insurance isn't, even if we mandate insurance, it's probably not going to cover those instances. And then Jesse and I had a phone call with another insurance rep last month, and he was telling us that the insurance companies would probably not be very likely to have to cover all ADV situations. I'm sure they would be happy to give you like a salvage rider on the chance for like a storm instance, but they would not. He was telling us that the general insurance company would not be in favor of having to cover all disposal of potential ADV boats, because that would be, or just a disposal in general, because that would be something that would be a guaranteed cost for them. So they know they would eventually have to pay out disposal, and that is something that the insurance industry would probably push back on. But
yeah, Anthony, you're right. That it is a can of worms. There's no question. It's a difficult one to figure out. But the baseline discussion that we had with the group in Georgia was much like uninsured motorists. You can't depend on everyone to have it. But
Yeah, and so, but I did just want to mention that is something we will be talking about in the paper, at least briefly.
Great. Well, that's about all I've got to offer on this, Katie. It is a talking point, and I will keep you and the group up to date on anything that I find if there's any action anywhere else. And I think I promised last time, and I will conclude on this, that I would speak with the guys at Geico, since we have a line all the way to the top there, and figure out if they have any recommendations or what they think may be happening at the national scene.
Great. Or if they're hearing other conversations like this in other states.
Yes, indeed. Thank you for the opportunity, Katie.
Thank you, Ed. We appreciate that very much. And at this point, we're going to turn it back over to Jeff Flood with the Coast Zone Management Program to talk about some other research updates. So Jeff, back to you.
Sure. Thank you again, Ed. That was awesome. And it's really great to have guest speakers, just give some sound bites and some ideas, and love to get posted on that going forward. So as you all can see, we're working on multiple different fronts here. Policy, funding, background research, lessons learned from other areas. So this next segment is really just to give you an update on some of the stuff that we're working on. I'd mentioned before in previous meetings our inventory, which started with a Coast Guard spreadsheet of just about 170 ADVs that they've been tracking since 2013. So we'd think that that's probably going to be a similar amount, given that not much reduction seems to be in the capacity right now for various agencies. So about that number, plus a couple more entries. I sent Ed a email yesterday kind of detailing the response of some of to the survey we'd sent it via that Google Forms, and we do send that out with our regular email blast. So if you're interested in sending it out to folks in your network, whatever that may be, encourage them to fill out the survey and then email me with some photos and follow up, so I can kind of put a name to an entry. But so far we have about 22 of those, and what I can tell, it's closer to about 15 or so that are different entities. There's multiple ADVs being submitted, so we're looking to kind of merge these two spreadsheets. But that's the update on that. Once we have an idea of all these vessels, their locations, we've asked for launch coordinates, we'll kind of start putting some of the price numbers on based on the length, the location, the habitat they're in, and start kind of piecing together what could be the priority, and then kind of play some scenarios with depending on the funding that we would be able to do, whether it be a fee, whether we get something from the General Assembly. So kind of get the list and then put it through those different scenarios and prioritize it that way.
I've got a real quick question, Jeff. Did the survey, the list that we provided out of our database to the Virginia marinas, assist in you getting some of the information that you needed? And is there anything else we can do? I heard from several marina owner operators big thank yous for including them in that list. Do you think that was effective, or can we do another round for you? Can we push that button? Let me know what we can do to help there.
Well, yeah, actually, let me go ahead and share a flyer that we've just had developed that we do want to get out to marinas and all kinds of areas where boaters might see it. So here's a draft of the flyer. Can you see that okay? Yes. So our plan is to print these up. They're 8 by 8 inches, which won't take up as much bulletin board space. And they are also, because of an unusual size, hopefully they'll be more eye-catching. So basically just telling boaters this opportunity. There's a QR code that people can just hold their phones over, and it will take them right to the survey. How will we get these distributed? There's a couple of options. One is, yes, Ed, I mean, it would be great if you could attach this to an email to your 200 plus marina contact list. We're also talking to the Clean Marina program at the Virginia Institute of Marine Sciences, which has a lot of freshwater marinas, so we can get the word out that way too. I'm also looking into printing these and having them laminated and then mailing them to marinas. If there's a mailing already going out to marinas where we could slip this in, that would be cost effective as opposed to mailing them separately. But yeah, we definitely want to get these out through your contacts, Ed, as well as everybody else who's in the work group. I'll pause here and see if there's any comments or reaction to this this flyer.
I think this is excellent. If I can get a soft copy of it, I can have it printed locally and distributed to the marinas around Smith Mountain Lake, and we can reach out to Lake Anna as well.
Marvelous, thank you.
I
Yes.
can help you with that, Neil, also.
Yeah.
And Katie, when you, it's a good looking flyer. And I think we'll be more than happy to assist in the distribution to our marinas. Do you need our full, did we provide you just email addresses, or did we also give you, in the database, did we also give you street addresses?
No, you did not give us your list. Instead, we wrote an email and then you sent it out because we thought that you, as a known person to the marinas, would get more people to open the email. But yeah, we can talk offline about the best way to.
I'll get you a mailing list of the Virginia marinas that are in our database with street addresses, contacts, et cetera, in an Excel spreadsheet so that you can do a mailing, and then we will also e-blast this as we have done in the past to the marinas in our database.
Marvelous, thank you. And it just occurs to me that this could be used as an ad in publications. So
Yeah.
people have newsletters or membership updates, magazines. Yes, this could be used as an ad. In fact, we could even get it reformatted to meet the needs of a newsletter if that would help.
Sorry to hijack Jeff's piece there, but I wanted to follow on. I didn't have any updates on that, so I'm back in mute. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. No, perfect segue. So I appreciate that, Katie. That's we want to credit Virginia Whitmer with our CZM staff that put that together. She's absolutely marvelous in these outreach campaigns. So yeah, I guess that does answer a little bit of your question, Ed. Just yes, it has been successful, and yes, we'll just follow the steps that you just outlined there to kind of close the loop. I'd like to get about 40 responses. So right now for about 15, a little bit less than 3 times that amount, maybe up to 50, I think would be a good enough pool. Certainly there are that many marinas in the Commonwealth. So I guess the next area, I can share the agenda. Really, I'll bring up the list of these key issues. So we've had some more and actually added some of this document as Anthony was talking earlier about unintended consequences and things that we need to address when we go and share this questionnaire. It's again very informal stage right now. We're probably cleaning up a little bit, but to have these ideas so that when we're asking these other states, it mirrors what Anthony's doing, or complements it rather, and then also we're getting the same response to the same questions to be able to really kind of have apples to apples. So let me share my screen with that Word document here. And this, all right. Let's see, y'all seeing the ADV issues for other states?
Yes,
All right, is it big enough?
I'd make it bigger.
Okay, ooh, that's way too big. How about that?
Good.
Good, okay. And this is on one side monitor. I don't know why I'm not seeing it. I'm seeing the document, but not on y'all's screen. So anyway, so as I said, we'd like to approach, talk to other states about this. Probably just start off with an email, kind of get gauge their interest, and then go into this and at their convenience fill it out. Something that came up again. So here, feel free to comment on any of these at any point. I'm not going to run through them and then ask for Q&A. Just happy to kind of sit on them, marinate, and then we can also do an open discussion, I think, later in this agenda if something pops up later. So really just giving you an overview. Might play around with the order of this a little bit differently, but defining ADV, defining, do you classify recreational versus commercial, that sort of thing. Do you have, again, the boating insurance, the type, the rider, the looking into that, as Ed mentioned, the registration and titling, state of ownership. Do they, to Anthony's point about the whole process during the removal, do they transfer that? And then back to the whole titling thing, whereas the liability is on the last known owner. How do we do that? How do we track them? How do we encourage people to get rid of the environmental threat potentially that is an ADV but also sell it to the person and transfer the paperwork and have that accountability. So we don't want to discourage people from trying to do the right thing. We just want to show what that correct process is. And then kind of moving into the fun stuff, this came up with the Lake Anna Civic Association. We had some folks say that a $10 fee a year is nothing compared to how much you're paying for a boat or other insurance and whatnot. So just to pay a $10 fee that goes into a larger water quality fund to deal with harmful algal blooms or hydrilla that gets in everyone's props. So to really just broaden that and to have the inland marinas feel like they're getting a portion of the benefits versus just the coastal things, to have a little bit of equity across, because this program is program and problem are Commonwealth wide. Get a little pulse, get some frank assessments on how much of a pain was it to pass in the legislature, or were they able to do it through their own regulatory body, and it was just a minor change and it didn't require changes to the state code. Is it a local issue? We talked about that, getting folks to reimburse the localities. What's the climate of the Board of Supervisors? Certainly someone who has local connections might have more clout than someone who's nowhere near a marina and would have to, that would probably be more of a state approach. So you see more localities next to these bodies of water. Is there a dynamic that we haven't really thought about? And then at the local level, Lake Anna folks mentioned a decal program. How would you track that? How much would it be? Would it be on top of a state ADB fund? How much is too much? And then there's sort of how do we market this? And Katie's brought this point up a lot repeatedly, is that you don't want to think that I kind of came up with this as sort of a Social Security thing where someone is paying into it this year, but it's not certain that they're going to get that payout, given the federal government and all these long-term uncertainties. So, if they think that they're paying right now this fee, do they think that they can come down at the end of the line in 30 years and say, oh yeah, well, I already paid, you guys got to haul this away, just sort of like, leaving it out with a takeout sign with your trash. So that's got to be thought about long-term horizon for this program. Where do we stop? If every ADV is picked out in the next 2 years, where do we stop? And do we stop? And how much education prevention go forward? Grant partners, it's been mentioned a couple of times about having some local power companies, Dominion and then AEP and Smith on the Lake, to talk about being local grant partners. Katie may get into more funding stuff, and I know in their subcommittee meeting, the funding one next week on Monday, we will be getting into more depth about grant applications, but to look at for local partners, because if it's federal money, most likely going to have a one-to-one match. So that's something to kind of consider. Some penalties as well. It was mentioned litter being something. The classification, is it litter? Is it an environmental, an oil leak? Those different menu and suite of penalties. We talked a little bit about contractor vetting and those insurance requirements. All comes down to the ownership, whether it's the state or it's the contractor doing those things. We have our awesome removal subcommittee led by Megan Keys of DEQ looking at landfill requirements and contractor lists. So that's something that we'll kind of get some internal information on. But we want to get this from other states. We did touch on recycling programs. The pilot was the Rhode Island speaker at our last work group meeting, overall work group meeting on March 3rd, talking about using the fiberglass hulls as a heat source for cement. So there's a lot of different things going on there. Keep an eye for emerging technology. Manufacturing turn-in. Anthony mentioned a previous meeting that France, I believe, has a program, sort of an end of life, sort of cradle to grave model for different products. So that's something to keep an eye on. Again, maybe more of a national level policy. There's always gaps and limitations in our knowledge in these things, and it'd be nice to see where one jurisdiction ends, even having a nice little graphic in the final report we have. So to get an idea of that interplay with other states. Having inventory, just like with the one I'm trying to do. Is it there? Is it the same parameters? Have they gone out through someone like an Ed Tillett to reach out to the marinas? How is that? How is the data collected? How is it processed? And then Katie brought up this point yesterday, great point of an annual report. And we do have some resources. NOAA has a website for these various states programs, but it'd be great to get our hands on, a nice shiny PDF of the report and how they count. And that would be kind of a symbol and a metric for a very mature program, I would think, to be able to have the funding, to have the staff, to have a report and to be able to document the funds spent, hopefully on that removal and public outreach. And then, as always, unintended consequences. We encourage you all to email anytime. If you get up in the middle of the night and you have an idea that, oh my gosh, this could be total disaster, can of worms, let us know. Always listening and welcome all the suggestions. So that's really what I have for our list. I did actually break my promise, ran through it pretty quick, but if there's any point you want me to go back to clarify or anything to add right now, we can also send this list out as well.
And again, everyone, this list is going to be the guide as we reach out to other states and ask questions. And this started out focusing on funding because the funding subcommittee wants us to summarize how other states are funding their program. But then we realized, hey, if we're going to have the people who run these programs in other states on the phone, let's make this a comprehensive interview. So what's missing from this list of questions?
The one thing that I keep wondering about is what happens for vessels that are registered outside the Commonwealth. So, for example, North Carolina, Maryland, the adjoining states, but they are housed legally or illegally in the Commonwealth.
So the question would be, how do other states deal with that issue?
Yeah, how do you deal with something that's registered out of state?
Okay.
Being able to take ownership, being able to remove it, things like that. I mean, even tracking down registered owners sometimes for out-of-state vessels is a challenge.
Okay. Great point. Thank you. Any other questions we should be asking other states as we interview them? And of course, we recognize that Anthony's already done a lot of this, focused more on the law and policy side. But we'll also be asking, do they do public outreach and education and all these other questions? Well, okay, we're also going to be running this list by the people who are on the funding subcommittee, which will be meeting next Monday at 9 a.m. You're all welcome to attend that meeting as well. But we just want to make sure while we're talking to the other states, we use the time wisely and ask everything we can think of. So as Jeff said, if you think of any other questions we should be asking, please reach out to either one of us and we'll add it to our questionnaire. And you're on mute, Jeff.
I'll stop the share and go back to our agenda here. Thanks again, Neil, for that suggestion. Here it is. All right. Big enough?
Looks good.
Okay, cool. So really just any more general discussion of points. I know we're kind of, we got a little more time left here, but also, early meeting endings. I'm sure everyone would enjoy that. So if you're just open the floor, we always want to have that time where people can kind of mull and marinate on an idea that's been popped up before, add a question for someone, and just really give any updates that you all have and have us stop talking and hear from you guys.
I think one of the things that we have talked in some of the different subcommittees is early intervention. If you look at Smith Mountain Lake, it's what, 55 years old now. A lot of the marinas are 55 years old as well, and a lot of the boats in the marinas are probably 55 years old. As I run around the lake, responding to different calls, I see instances and I hear from residents around the lake that, hey, take a look at this boat. It's starting to sit a little low in the water. So one of the things I think that's going to shift from, the problem that we have with the boat sitting on the bottom right now is how do we prevent the next set of boats from going down? So I think it's that early intervention that's going to start creeping up as probably the next big issue. Just a random thought. Sorry.
Yeah, no, good
Oh,
point.
great.
Yeah.
Excellent. And that's something that we really, it definitely is going to be, as all these subcommittees cross-pollinate. I mean, it's going to come into a funding issue. It's going to come into a cost. I'm not just saying, hey, there's 170 plus vessels sunk right now, but looking forward to that, getting idea of how many of those are kind of teetering on the precipice of sinking. And then also with our outreach and public education subcommittee, that would be an excellent task once we really get some of these policy recommendations to continue the program. And that end of that work will never end. So sorry, Jessica, I think you're in it for the long run with the public outreach, but that'll be just something to do to really not just the flyer that we mentioned earlier, but get an idea and maybe have a system of reporting. Maybe we put out that Google Forms and we change it so that it's more user-friendly and less in-depth, less detailed, but just say, here's a general idea of how many are out there that are looking a little suspicious, and that would be another next step for the inventory. So great.
Yeah, and to Neil's point,
thank
when
you for
we read
that.
that article about fiberglass repurposing that we sent out, what, about a month and a half ago, they did mention that the earliest fiberglass boats are now reaching the age where they need care or they need to be removed. So yeah, this is not a problem probably that existed 20 years ago, because the fiberglass boats back then were younger, but they are getting older. So good point, Neil. Thank you.
Jeff, to that extent, once these notes are done, I can add some of this next steps items into that sheet and into our agenda to include as discussion points.
Perfect.
Okay.
Yep.
So whenever those are out, I'll tap into them.
And everyone,
Absolutely.
that's Jessica, who is leading the public education and what's the other word we've got in there?
Outreach.
What do you say? PPE, public prevention and public education.
Prevention, that's the key. Prevention and public education. Right. Thank you.
Is Officer Dooley on the call?
No, he's not.
Oh, he's not. Okay. I was going to ask him how he deals with out-of-state voters that Neil Harrington had.
He is on the call. I apologize.
Yep.
Yeah, Tim Dooley, if you can join us to answer that question. He might have stepped away. He's on mute.
Okay.
And he doesn't have his cameras on. So, as far as next steps, as you see there, we are going to have a doodle poll that will set our next meeting. We've selected the 19th, 22nd, or 23rd. It's partly going to depend on the availability of Anthony, who's writing the policy paper, the white paper. But when you get that doodle poll, please fill it out. We're super excited, to see that recommendation. And I guess by our next meeting, we'll also have some of the results from the interviews that we will be conducting with other states. And, basically, how do you think we're doing with this issue of learning more about laws and policies and crafting recommendations? Are you all pleased with the progress, or is there something that we should be spending some time on in the next month?
Looks like you're doing pretty good on the questions you have for other states, so that's encouraging.
Yep. And Neil and I chatted yesterday evening, and we're going to be reaching out to some of the Smith Mountain Lake marinas to get their perspective to cover that. So that should be another update we've got. And then, as we said earlier, getting out the working with Ed to extend the survey, get the flyer out. So lots going on, and we'd love for everyone to attend the Monday funding subcommittee meeting. There will be some overlap, but definitely some distinct conversation topics as well. So
yeah,
we're always welcome, and feel free to reach out to us.
One of the interesting things on our agenda for Monday morning is, what would we do in Virginia if we had $100,000 or $200,000 to go the next step, what would our priorities be? So if you're interested in that question or answer, please do join us Monday at 9 o'clock. And you have all received an email from me that has the Zoom link to that meeting. Was there anything else at all anybody wants to bring up? If not, yay, we'll finish early today. So last call for comments.
Just thanks for all your hard work.
Well, thank you. Thank you all for your contribution.
Thank you all for your time and interest in this. Couldn't do that, Jim.
And a special thank you to Mitchell Sherry, who is a student here at Longwood University. He's graduating next month with his bachelor's degree. He's done a fabulous job writing up notes and giving us the ability to keep people in the loop. So thank you, Mitchell, very, very much.
Thank you.
We losing Mitchell next month?
Yeah, unfortunate. Going off to the real world.
Don't do it. It's not worth it. Stay there. All right.
Well,
Bummer, but also exciting. Congrats, Mitchell.
all right. Well,
Thank you.
all again, and you can always email us if you have any thoughts, comments, or new ideas. So thanks, and we will see you at our next meeting.
Thank
Thank you, everyone.
everyone.
All right. Have a great
Thanks,
weekend.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.